Hey friends, welcome back to my channel for another video on the How I Homeschool playlist. So if this is the first time you're watching one of these videos on this playlist, I created this playlist to answer commonly asked questions on how I do things as a homeschooling mom who has been homeschooling for a while now, with hopes of helping any of you guys out there who are newer homeschoolers coming in behind me, or maybe just are wondering different ways of doing things. So I am creating this playlist, which is totally something I wish I could have found when I first started homeschooling, in hopes of helping you guys. I've made quite a few videos on the playlist already, so you can take a scroll through this playlist and possibly find, answers or ideas for some things that you may be wondering. I am continually adding to the playlist, so if you have a question on how I do something in my homeschool that you think would make a great video, please post it down in the comments of this video, because I come back to these videos to see if there's anything that I should add to my running list of videos to film for this playlist. So today we're going to be talking about how I do reading in my homeschool. This one was requested by a lot of you guys, wondering how I do individual reading, how I do family read alouds, how I assign reading, how many chapters, how many minutes. And so I'm just going to tell you guys how we do reading in our homeschool in this video. Of course, I have to always give the disclaimer on all of these videos that this is how we do it in our homeschool. This is what works for us. I'm not saying you definitely should do it my way. I'm just here to share what we've done and what has worked for us well over the last 7 years. So with all that said, let's talk about how we do reading. So reading in our homeschool is probably one of the most important things that I feel like I've done since I very first started homeschooling. There's a few things that I started when I very first started homeschooling. I'm talking about like day one of homeschooling. There's very few things that I did then that I do exactly the same now, 7 years later. However, reading aloud to my kids is one of those things that was a foundational thing in our homeschool from the start, and it continues to be a huge portion of our homeschool. There's different curriculums out there that are literature-based homeschooling curriculums, and so basically what that means is that all of the subject materials that you're learning are coming from reading books. And if I ever had to choose a homeschooling method that I'm most aligned with, it would be like a literature-based approach to homeschooling. I love reading books with my kids, and it's been something we've done since day one. Now, the amount and the times and the time of day has changed as my kids have gotten older, but we've done family read alouds at bedtime because it was just too hard to have so many young kids sit together. When they were younger, I would do some read alouds while they were eating, because if they were eating lunch or having a snack, then their hands and their mouths were busy and quiet. And so that's kind of the way that I did like reading in our homeschool when my kids were really young, was I read to them at multiple spots throughout our homeschooling day, so that I wasn't asking my 7-year-old or 8-year-old and under to like sit still for an hour while we read on the couch. That just was not realistic. So that's the way we did it, when I first started homeschooling. Well, now here I am with, I would say, like older kids, and so we can do read alouds a little bit differently. So I would say for the last 2 to 3 years, this is how we've done reading in our homeschool. So starting with read alouds. Read alouds are a huge portion of our morning basket. I always have different books that I'm rotating in and out depending on what science unit we're doing, or if there's a holiday coming up. I love incorporating fun things like that. But we do read aloud for our morning time. So There's always, these are the constants. I am always reading a missionary story to my kids aloud, and I am always reading a chapter book aloud. Now, the chapter book may or may not correlate with history, and it could just be a book that I want to read my kids. There are so many books, classic books, that I want to read to my kids that I have been homeschooling for 7 years, and I still have not read all of the books that I've wanted to read them. There's still like some that were on the initial list that I had that we just haven't read. So I'm always reading those two things, a missionary story and a read aloud. Now, sometimes when you add in like reading, when I'm reading history curriculum, and when I'm reading our nature poem, and when I'm reading a book that goes with the holiday, and when I'm reading what else, Bible curriculum to my kids, all of those things are read aloud. So that is like what encompasses our morning time, and sometimes that's a lot of reading for me. So I will have my kids participate in reading aloud. That is such a valuable skill that should not be overlooked. So have your kids help you read aloud. So I will have, I'll tell them, I want you to read 3 pages and then pass it to the next sibling. So sometimes we'll do it that way. For a chapter book, they definitely don't do like all of the reading, but generally each day I'll have them help me with something, reading aloud. And so that's kind of the way we do it. Or some days I'll just say, I'd like you to read this chapter, and that child will read it. It's also really, really beneficial for older kids to listen to younger kids read, and younger kids listen to older kids read for more than one reason. So that is how we do like our read alouds, and I keep track of all of them because I know it seems like, it would be easy to keep track of all the books you read, but it's actually not for me. And so I created these reading logs right here. These are available on my website. It's a PDF download, and so once you buy it, you have it forever. And I also make photocopies of this for each of my kids, and we'll get into that in a second. But I do record down all of the read alouds that we do, and I just printed off a fresh one to show you guys what it looks like. I print off one of those for each of my children. So that's the way we kind of do like family read aloud time. At a minimum, I am always reading 1 missionary story and 1 chapter book, and then all of the other stuff, history, science, nature poems, Bible curriculum, all of that is also reading out loud in our homeschool. So now moving on to my kids' individual reading. So I always have my children reading a book that is separate from their language arts curriculum. Most of the time, no matter what company you use for language arts and reading, there will be an assigned type of reading that goes along with that curriculum. So this book is in addition to whatever they are required to read for whatever curriculum they're using. I generally will have options, and they will choose which book they are interested in reading. I allow them the choice of what they want to read. Now, sometimes there's a book that I want them to read, and so I'll just say, I want you to read this one next, and they're fine with that. So the way that I do it is I require them every day for school to read 1 chapter in their book. And sometimes they want to read more, and of course that is always okay, but I generally will have them do 1 chapter each day. And if it's a book that they're really, really into, then sometimes they just want to keep reading and reading and reading and reading, and of course there's other things to be completed in the school day. So I'll just say, okay, read the rest of that when you're done with your math, or whatever. So I do have like limitations on the amount of time that they can be reading in their book, just to allow time to complete other things. But that's the way that I do it. So they always are reading an assigned chapter book, and by assigned I mean like they've chosen it out, I've seen it, I agree with it, and they are recording it down on their reading logs. That is in addition to anything they're required to read from their language arts or writing curriculum or whatever it might be. And so that is the way that we do reading in our homeschool. 1 chapter a day in a book of their choice. Now, my kids are avid readers, and I think it's because we have just, you know, we've always valued books in our homeschool, and so my kids love to read. So oftentimes, I would say 99% of the time, my kids are reading other things. When we go to the library, they're reading tons of books. When they you know, they have books on their bookshelves in their room that aren't necessarily like school books that I keep in our library for use for everyone, but more like books that they've wanted for their own individual interests. And so they're always reading those books too. So my kids read a ton, and so it's hard for me to like segment like how I do reading in my homeschool, because this is an area of homeschooling that just overlaps. You guys have seen it like in my day in the life videos. It's not even something that I try to like show, but a lot of you have picked up on it that, you know, when I'm talking in the car, you can always see my little two in the back reading a book. So my kids just love reading. So it's not something that I feel I have to force on them, because they all really enjoy it. And so they're always reading a chapter book for school, a book that probably goes along with their language arts, and then they're reading a ton of things on their own in their own free time. Now, as far as do they read to themselves or do they read to me? So generally around the 4th to 5th grade is when I will have my kids start reading, you know, silently to themselves sometimes. I like to still read with them, and so, you know, maybe every other day I'll have them read aloud to me a chapter in their book, or, you know, they read it to themselves. My older kids, high school, upper middle school, they read on their own silently, and it's not something I need to follow up on. They are capable of reading, comprehending, understanding, and that's demonstrated in the lesson that they're doing. But my younger ones, still, you know, in the 4th and 5th grade, even into 6th grade, I like to hear them reading. And so what I also created on my website are these little book reports. Okay, so here's another reading log. I accidentally printed 2 of those. But I created a book report printable for a boy and for a girl. And so if I have them do a silent reading book and they finish it, then I have them fill this out as a way of kind of demonstrating that they understood the setting, the plot, the characters, that type of thing. And so that shows me that they understand the book. So I have them do one of those little book report pages every time they finish an assigned chapter book for school. Reading on their own before bed, in their free time, whatever they want, not for that, but just for the books that they're reading during actual school hours. So that is how we do that. So that's a brief overview of how I do reading. Now, another thing that I always get asked is like, where do I find books that I want my kids to read? So I wish I could tell you that there's like one place that has the best list of all time, but quite honestly, there's a lot of different places. So the Good and the Beautiful library is a huge resource for me for books in my homeschool, because the content and the moral value is there. I also love like a lot of the books that Sunlight uses in their curriculum. And so oftentimes I'll go back to their website and kind of see what books they're including for different things and see if there's any titles that we haven't read, because those are like classic books. And then a lot of times I get recommendations from you guys that help me out as well. So I kind of go all over the place, and my friends say, hey, we really enjoyed this book, and you know, so there's not one place, but those are kind of the places that I go to kind of find different books that we may want to read. And then another thing that we do in our homeschool for reading is I am not a huge believer in only reading like high school level literature to high schoolers and you know, lower elementary to lower elementary. We read across the grades and the ages, and I think that there's huge value in doing that as well in a homeschool. So that is how we do reading in our homeschool. I hope I hit all the different questions and points that I get regarding reading. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments how you do reading in your homeschool. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I will get back to you. And if you have any questions or would like to see a video on how we do something in our homeschool, be sure to leave it in a comment on this playlist so I know that that is a video that I need to add to my list. But I hope you guys are doing well, and I will see you all in my next video really soon. Bye guys.